Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Nathan if you don't know me, and today we're going to start a new series we called the Wrestle. And I think it's really important to talk about this in these crazy times. We've all wrestled, we've all been broken, we've all been hurting during these times. Like, God, why is all this going on? Why have things been canceled? God, I'm kind of sad. And today I think God is inviting us to a season where we can just open up and we can ask the hard questions. I want to encourage you today in your small groups to just be your true selves before God. Come with what you have. So I'm going to read a story for you from the Bible in Genesis 32. It's one of my favorite stories, and it's Jacob wrestling with God. In Genesis 32, verses 24 to 32, it says this: Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he was wrestling with him. Then he, being God, said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But then Jacob responded, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So God said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." He said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Jacob asked him and said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved." So that's a strange story that we get in Genesis, where Jacob and God have a wrestling match. And I think in order to really understand the weight of the story, I'm going to just dive into the background of Jacob. Many of you maybe know Jacob a little bit and his feud with his older brother Esau. One of the stories that happened in their life was Esau was a hunter, and Esau was going out hunting one day for food, coming back exhausted and tired, and he was vulnerable. And Jacob was making soup, and he had some soup. Esau just reached out to his brother and said, "Can I have a bowl of soup?" And in this place of vulnerability, Jacob tricked his brother into selling the birthright, as he said, "I'll give you this soup if you sell me your birthright." So here we see Jacob tricking his brother and deceiving him. And later on in the story, we see their father Isaac is really old, says he's near to death, and he wants to give his blessing to Esau, the older son. He tells Esau, "Go make me my favorite type of food." And Jacob overhears this, and with the help of his mom, he quickly prepares a meal while Esau's out hunting. And he goes into his father's room with the food, and he asks his father Isaac for his brother's fatherly blessing. Isaac asks Jacob, he says, "Are you my older son Esau?" And Jacob replies with, "Yes, it is I, Esau, your oldest." Jacob lied, he received the blessing, and he tricked his father. He deceived his older brother Esau. So obviously with this, Esau was enraged. So Jacob fled away to his mother's homeland, to his uncle Laban. And he didn't have the greatest relationship with his uncle. In fact, he actually ended up stealing a lot of his sheep, and eventually kind of stealing his family. And so Jacob was forced out 20 years later, going back to his homeland. So he has Laban behind him, and on the other side he has his older brother Esau, who he hears is coming for him on the other side. So Jacob is actually trapped in the middle of two fights, between Esau and between Laban. And this is where we see our story of God wrestling with Jacob. It's in this time where Jacob is worried for his life, where he's anxious, where he's afraid, where his norms are shattered. The first thing that I really love about this story is God is the God that answers you in the day of your distress. And this happened for Jacob in the middle of two fights. Whatever you might be stressing over these days, whatever situation you find yourself in, God will meet you in those places. God showed up and he wrestled with Jacob. And what this showed me is that God shows up in ways that we don't often expect, but ways we most often need. And so God knew exactly what Jacob needed, which was a fight. And this is exactly what he was trying to avoid. Even when Jacob was fleeing and resisting, God was pursuing him. And secondly, what I want to go into is those forced out of their comfort zone are the ones who actually encounter God and are called by him. And you see, Jacob was certainly not in his comfort zone. Jacob was fleeing from Laban. He was worried about Esau, and he was in a wrestling match with God. He was not comfortable for sure. But It was in this place of uncomfortableness where God chose to bless him, where God actually called him, and God chose him to be his people. So if you're sitting in your comfort zone, you're probably only going to amount to mediocrity in your life. You're never going to be stretched, you're never going to grow. It's plain and simple. So God, we see continually, he calls those who are willing to be pushed outside of their comfort zone. And I think if we look in the rest of the biblical narrative, if we look back at the life of Abraham, in Genesis 12, God calls him. And here Abraham doesn't know who God is. Really, it's the first time kind of he hears from him. He follows God away from his family, out of his comfort zone, and he just chases after God. And if you see Moses too, grew up in Egypt, and he actually murdered an Egyptian there, and so he fled to the wilderness. And in the wilderness, God met him at the burning bush. And at the burning bush, God calls him to go back to Egypt. He is a murderer. And we see this through other characters like David, through Peter, and through Paul. All of these people in the Bible were pushed out of their comfort zones. And that forced them to really rely on God more and more. One of my favorite parts of the story is actually Jacob, his hip gets put out of place. It says that God touched his hip and it was dislocated. And then it says Jacob is clinging onto God. And I just kind of imagine him just on the ground, his arms wrapped around God's legs, like a young child wrapping themselves around their mother or their father's legs. And it is here in this position of vulnerability where he asks for God's blessing. And the question that God responds is what really intrigues me. God responds back to Jacob asking for his blessing with, "What is your name?" And what is so significant about this is if we remember the last time Jacob was asked his name, and this all happened when Isaac, his father, was actually blessing him. And his father Isaac asked, "What is your name?" And Jacob actually responded with, "I am Esau." So the last time Jacob was asked his name, he lied about who he was. And so God wants you to bring your true self, your real self in front of him. And when Jacob said his name, when he said, "I am Jacob," Jacob is essentially saying, "I am the cheater, I am the deceiver, I am Jacob the trickster, I am Jacob the liar, and I want your blessing." And once Jacob was able to acknowledge this, that's when God was able to change him and bless him and make a great nation out of him. So I encourage you guys, God wants the real you. He wants your true self. And right after this, what God does is he changes Jacob's name and he changes it to Israel. And if you guys don't know, Israel is God's people throughout the whole Old Testament. That is the people that God uses, and that's where God, the nation where God resides. And this is so significant for us 3,000 years later as Christians, because it shows that our origin as Christians was birthed with the wrestle with God. And therefore, we as Christians are also meant to follow that, and we're meant to wrestle. You're meant to ask the hard questions in life. Those questions you maybe felt like you weren't allowed to ask to God or to a pastor. I encourage you guys to ask them. Are you going to choose to wrestle when life gets hard? You know, when you face moments of crisis, are you going to wrestle? What about when your life seems to crash in around you? Or someone you love lays close to death? Or maybe in the situation we're in where a pandemic has gripped the world in fear. In these moments of crisis, we have a choice and we have an opportunity. We can either resist God and stay in our comfort zone, or we can choose to trust Him. We can choose to ask for His Spirit and His presence to move. I think in these hard times, basically we can give up or we can look up to God and we can ask Him to help us. Because without the hard times in our lives, you would never really know if you truly trust God. And so I think the biggest problems that we face are never our circumstances. Whether our circumstances, be with a relationship or whether it be this crazy pandemic going on. The greatest problems are never our circumstances, but our heart position. Our biggest crisis that we face can be our greatest opportunity. It can be our greatest opportunity to see God move in tremendous new ways. It can be our greatest opportunity to see revival break out in our schools, in our homes, in our youth group, and in our church. But what matters is not the circumstance, but your heart position. And we see in the story of Jacob wrestling with God is Jacob's biggest crisis was turned into the greatest blessing ever. It was turned into God choosing him as His chosen people, the family through whom He would send Jesus to save and redeem the world. And so just to finish off, I want to highlight a few important things. You can't wrestle someone from far away. So essentially what I'm trying to say is wrestling implies intimacy. And so I have a story. It's one of my favorite stories to share all the time. When I was 12 years old, I cut the back of my leg on my bike pedal pretty bad, and I had to get like 12 stitches. A week later, I got my stitches out of my leg, and I was over at my grandma's house. We have Sunday dinners there, and me and my older brother were playing on my grandma's original Xbox, playing Tiger Woods 2005. I remember very vividly on the last hole, I chipped in to win the game, and I was kind of rubbing it in my brother's face, as a good younger brother should do. He got a little angry, deservingly so, and we started wrestling, and he actually grabbed my leg right where I got the stitches pulled out, and he ripped the cut open again. I had to go get 6 more stitches in my leg. What I want to say with that is, me and my brother, we wrestled a lot growing up, and we asked each other hard questions. Yeah, we fought many times, but today our relationship is so strong and we're so close with one another because we have wrestled and we have grown in those ways. So wrestling implies intimacy. So I want to invite you guys to wrestle. And lastly, what I love in this story is after Jacob's hip gets put out, he realizes he's at the end of himself. He has no more strength. All he can do is cling on to God. So his only option was to get on his knees and to beg for God's blessing. So guys, renewals and blessings from God happen when people get on their knees and they're at the end of themselves and they can do nothing but rely on a contending for God's presence to move. So I want to encourage you guys today, during this time of uncertainty and relative chaos, to get down on your knees and contend for God's presence to move in your life and in our world today. Be your true self before God. Push out of your comfort zone. Wrestle with Him. Ask the hard questions to God. And lastly, guys, get down on your knees when you're at the end of yourself. Pray and fast and ask for His blessing and ask for His presence to move. We're meant to wrestle as it is our origin. It is our story of being the people of God. I love you guys. Have a great week. We'll talk to you later.